Burger or biryani, order it on ONDC and see it gives you a better deal than Zomato and Swiggy, quote unquote. Excited consumers and their social media chatter have finally given the Open Network for Digital Commerce its aha moment. A year after the government launched it, with the mission of democratizing and increasing e-commerce penetration in the country. Now, the price differential was a result of deep discounts which were employed after sales failed to take off, despite aggressively scaling the network for a year. Once consumers found out, in about 2 weeks' time, orders soared from a few hundred, hitting 25,000 daily orders in early May. Now, that's not a bad way to celebrate the first anniversary. While many assertions have been made, e-commerce the way it is will become irrelevant, Zomato and Swiggy's duopoly will be broken, digital feudalism and their digital landlords will be unseated, so on and so forth. However, analysts are cautious. They do concur that ONDC has a long way to go before it can break through the so-called walled gardens of Amazon, Flipkart, Zomato and Swiggy. More importantly, ONDC has some explaining to do, especially about what it is and what it seeks to become. What we understand today is what it is not. We know it's not an e-commerce app, it's not a marketplace, and it's not a platform. ONDC is a protocol, an enabler, a facilitator. It is what is arguably being called India's next UPI. What UPI did for payments in India, ONDC could do for e-commerce is the assertion. But despite these assertions, none of the e-commerce giants have expressed an interest to join yet. They say payments are commoditized, but products are not. They also fear for their own existence. If everyone is going to be the same, what will each of them stand for is the big question. What will brands stand for? And then who will assure for quality and reliability? Hello and welcome to YoungTurks, India's longest running show on startups and entrepreneurship. I'm Shereen Bhan. And as ONDC turns one, we have some questions to ask. Joining me now is Sujith Nair, the co-founder and CEO of the Foundation for Interoperability in Digital Economy. Anshoo Sharma, the co-founder and CEO of Magicpin. Also with us, Sagar, Daryani, the co-founder and CEO of Momo. He's also the vice president of the National Restaurant Association of India. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us. Sujith, let's get started with you. You know, we've seen headline after headline over the past 2 weeks to a fortnight screaming that ONDC is now going to be India's next UPI moment as far as e-commerce is concerned, and so on and so forth. But let's try and break the assertions up one by one. And let's talk about what is claimed, that this is in fact going to break the monopoly, break the duopoly across several segments and several sectors. Explain to us how you believe that's likely to happen.
Thanks, Shereen. Firstly, thank you for having me on your show. I think I'll probably take a step back and answer this question a little differently. ONDC is a force of inclusion. I think ONDC essentially as a digital public infrastructure, a bit like UPI, is trying to solve for two things. Solve for, widening the access to digital, especially for small businesses across India, across sectors, and also solve for reducing this cost of innovation, market expansion, and spreading that innovation and making that happen so that many more startups can solve for this complex problem of e-commerce and not just a few companies. So it's not so much about disrupting some of the existing incumbents or anything, but it's about widening the access, having more players come in, innovation come in, solving for access and making more and more goods and services accessible in a seemingly easy way for consumers to discover and purchase. So I think that's what it is. Of course, this has not been done before. It's an effort that's unprecedented, and similar questions were asked at the beginning of UPI. But the idea is to sort of take this, have this approach of making an attempt and bringing the ecosystem together and ask this question: is there a need? Is there a need to expand the access to digital commerce? We are barely 7 to 8% digital commerce in India. How do we expand that? How do we solve that? Is just few companies solving for it, or should we have more innovators, market players? And small merchants do need to get a chance to be discoverable and have their goods and services sold. So that's largely the idea. It's not so much about it's the status quo change. Is more about market expansion and allowing more players, and not about disrupting the few players that we have today.
and that's an important distinction that you make, that this is not about breaking monopolies or duopolies. It is about growing the market in itself, which, as you rightly point out, is still growing and is still fairly nascent. In fact, the ONDC McKinsey report put some numbers to that. The aim is to increase e-commerce penetration from 4.5% to about 25%, to increase digital consumption 5x to 340 billion. ONGC to push up digital transacting consumers by 3 to 4 times to 450 to 500 million. So that's really the aspiration that you're putting on the table. The question, Sagar, and I'll start by asking you, is let's address the issues that Sujith has raised, that this is a force of inclusion, that it wants to solve for widening access, and it also wants to solve for reducing the cost of doing e-commerce. Do you believe that it will be able to achieve both those goals?
I really agree with Sujith. Shereen, today you have 467 million social media users, whereas, on the aggregator platforms, you just have 25, 30 million users. So I think ONDC can go a long way in increasing the user base when it comes to people coming and doing digital ordering. Coming to cost, Shereen, we are in a very, we are in an ecosystem where the restaurateur is being charged high commissions. They are not happy. The customer is being charged surge delivery charges from 25 rupees to 40 rupees. They are definitely not happy. We have the P&L results for the aggregators. They are not making money. Definitely they're not happy. And their investors also not happy. So we are in an environment or an ecosystem where no one is happy, right? I think this business model has to change. This ecosystem, for it to survive and sustain, I think ONDC is going to create that path to profitability for the restaurateur. At the same time, it's going to provide that level playing field for the fraternity. I mean, today, just imagine people come to the app to order from a particular restaurant and they don't even know the customer. There is no data sharing on the customer, right? ONDC, gives you that consumer interface.
But Sagar, hang on. That's what I want to get into. The argument that you're putting on the table, and which is what we've heard from people, is that, look, nobody is happy in the current ecosystem. And of course, at this point in time, we're talking largely about the food aggregator business, and which is why you will possibly see ONDC take off. But it's following the same principles. Up until when the order to cap discounts came in, the reason why sales took off was because they were following exactly the same business model as the one that you're unhappy with. So given the spending power and the spending capacity of the Indian consumer at this point in time, are you sort of, is this optimism on ONDC being able to solve for that misplaced?
Not really. So I completely agree with you. I mean, the differential pricing that you saw on Twitter trending all these days was because of the deep discounting offered by different platforms, which are, powered by ONDC, etc. Completely against deep discounting. I think for it to be a level playing field, the user base has to go up. What will happen, Shereen, once the commission is lower and, you have a third party last mile person doing the delivery for you, which charges you 35 rupees for 3 kilometers, it makes it cheaper for the restaurant. What the restaurant will do is pass on that benefit to the consumer. What you see today online is the online pricing is higher and then the discount to it. You will see that nullifying. And I think that is where we need to get to. So completely off and against deep discounting. I think what we saw was definitely more of a traction of deep discounting, and completely agree with you that we are not for it. We are here and we are supporting ONDC to create that disruption. And I'm very, very happy that, those caps on discounting have come in.
Okay, so let's address this issue. Let me get a view in from Magicpin, because in many ways, Anshoo, you're being called the silent winner on ONDC, and that's because you've actually seen your daily orders jump from 1,000 to 10,000 by early May. So let me understand from you, through your own experience, of why you believe this is going to work.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me here, Shereen. Let me also just quickly do a Magicpin plug. We are a hyper-local platform that brings your local market on the phone of the user. We are a super app that lets you save across fashion, food, electronics, beauty, entertainment. And when ONDC proposition became something that we understood, we said this is the same agenda, of course, at a much larger scale. So we immediately got on to that idea that over the years, we've built the capability to identify local merchants, get them onboarded, catalog them, build an order management system, build integration with third-party logistics, track the order, ensure that the order with support is delivered to the consumer. And what we saw as the opportunity is that if we could plug in our 2 lakh merchants onto the network over a period, and they get a lot more distribution than what we were getting just on our app, that's a win-win for everyone. And I'll go back to the point that you brought up, and all very rightly so, that if the same seller now, instead of 2 platforms, can access maybe 20 more big platforms, like that's a big win. The cost of doing business for the merchant goes down. Sagar gave the example of the logistics company, but just the marketing spend, that goes down. The consumer sees more options from local at many more places, and that is a win-win for the whole ecosystem. The piece which is a challenging piece is that unlike a single platform doing the orders on itself, here the order hops across multiple platforms. Let's say from PhonePe or Paytm, it goes to ONDC, comes to us, goes to a third-party logistics, and then is stitched back all the way. But as with any industry, there is maturity that's coming in. When Flipkart, Amazon started in the country, they built their own logistics. Now, no D2C brand which is starting off needs to do that. They can just get started with a website and the rest of the stuff is taken care of. I think the hyperlocal industry is going to go down that same path. And what we saw, in fact, not just 10,000, the next week we did 20,000 orders on the network. We could do that because the rails are getting established.
How many are you doing this week? Anshoo, how many did you do this week?
Oh, so let me come back to what you're trying to understand. The discounts going away did not take the volumes away to that extent. We saw the tapering down of the volume, but it's not that it went away. And let me connect that back to, while Sagar said discounts are bad, but not really. You need to establish consumer behavior. We don't want to build one more of that same behavior. But what is happening now is user behavior is established, merchant behavior is established. The new platform that's going to get built will get built a lot faster, much less investment in building the network, really zero fixed cost. Paytm, when it's doing an order on Magicpin, doesn't need to build all of the work that we've done. They can just send the order to us, right? We'll do the delivery. Similarly, if we are thinking about ourselves, we don't need to invest in customer acquisition because Paytm's already done that, right? I think that creates a big opportunity. And it kind of, going back to Sujith's point first, right? It is enabling the market to become much larger. Of course, the cost of doing business goes down, which might impact margin, but then pricing comes in and the market expands itself.
And I think that's the important point to focus on. And I think if what I'm hearing from the three of you is that if the pizza itself is going to be bigger, then the slice for every individual operating on that is likely to be bigger as well. And that's what the hope or the bet is at this point in time. But Sujith, let's come back and talk about some of the complexities, because Anshoo rightly pointed out that he could service the going from 1,000 to 10,000 to 20,000. He didn't give us a number of what he currently is at, because he does have the back end in place at this point in time. He already has worked and solved for that issue. But, some of the new players that you're talking about, if the idea really is of democratization, how do you solve for that? How do you solve for the reliability? How do you solve for the quality aspects as well?
I think for a new player to come in on ONDC and do it at scale, let's say how Anshoo's Magicpin is doing already, I think firstly, they have to get a basic tech in place, and joining onto ONDC from a tech point of view is a very additional little effort that it takes, because it's a very lightweight protocol in terms of an engineering effort. But I think some of the things that they can do is to sort of have a way to establish trust for the items in the catalog, for the sellers they're offering, and to enable that as much as they can do that from ground zero, like any new platform would. What ONDC is enabling is on top of that. ONDC is offering its own trust infrastructure. I think you'll soon see there's a consultation paper out from ONDC as to how ONDC can create a network level trust, which means a new seller onboarded on a new platform can probably build trust at a network level, and ONDC will offer that So when I say ONDC, the infrastructure in ONDC, there are very trust providers who can come and offer that extra credibility from the early few transactions that the seller is doing. That is one. Second, the typical question that we get on ONDC is if the customer is on one platform and the seller is on another platform, and if the seller is new and the platform is new, how do I trust the delivery, right? I think one of the things is, how would you trust that even for any seller on some of the big platforms? You typically go back to that platform and raise a complaint and say, okay, this is something that I did not get as expected, and you initiate a return or cancellation and ask for refund. The same thing works on ONDC, and ONDC as a protocol solves for that in a decentralized way. There is structure. It solves for that. It does solve for that. Although it's a multi-platform, multi-party structure, it still does answer that, which means a new platform can leverage and harness that infrastructure on ONDC without having to prove all by itself. And this also is a reduction of cost of doing business, reduction of reducing friction and enhancing trust. And ONDC gives that additional shot in the arm for a new platform to get going on ONDC.
Okay, Sagar, and I guess a lot of what we're hearing from Sujith is going to be tested, and it will be tested in real time as we see this being built out. But what I want to understand from you, and this is something that Vidit Atre of Meesho raised, which I think is an important one, that look, a lot is being said, and I think you opened with that as well, that this could potentially be the UPI moment as far as e-commerce is concerned. But on the digital payment side, you're dealing with one aspect, and that is currency and digital payments. And in many ways, that is commoditized. But here, it's different. And products don't want to be commoditized. That's what brands are about. Brands are about differentiation. So how do you balance this aspect of brand non-commoditization on something like an ONDC?
I think every product is defined by its packaging, by its service, by the goodies that you provide to the end consumer. Now, an order coming through an ONDC platform is very similar to it coming to your own platform or to a Swiggy or a Zomato, because ultimately the rider who's going to be delivering, is trained and is part of the same ecosystem. Rather, in today's day and age, you have the same riders who work for third parties, work for Swiggy, work for Zomato. So ultimately, you have that shuffle between them. So net, you might have 4 different touch points, but ultimately it's just that the 4 different touch points are owned by 4 different, networks here. When it comes to an aggregator, it's one single network. But ultimately, the end service for someone like me, my takeaway customer and my delivery customer is the same, because the entire experience is not compromised there. So I don't see a compromise happening in terms of the service or the product quality. However, what I really emphasize on, and I just want to bring in that, we are not against discounting. We're against deep discounting. I'll tell you why. Aggregators came in years ago. Deep discounting continues to be there. You don't want consumers to be deal seekers. The minute that starts happening, there is the loyalty towards brand building, diminishes. And then the end goal of a brand existing is more of discounts and deals. And you don't want your service to be ruled by deals. That is where I'm coming from.
No, I agree with you. And I think in an era where easy money is hard to get by, I think everyone is now moving towards putting together a business model that is not dependent on deep discounting, because no one's going to pick up the tab or the check any longer, or at least not the way that they were used to. But Anshoo, let's address some of the challenges, down the road. And what many argue is that, look, for this to have any kind of a meaningful impact, ONDC is going to have to scale up and scale up very significantly. And the question is, what could that inflection point be? Is it the next 3 years? Is it the next 5 years? Could it be sooner or not? And for somebody like you, because I would imagine that that's what you're hoping for as well, what do you see as the big challenges now that you have decided to onboard ONDC?
Yeah, I think Sagar also referred to it. The experience to the consumer needs to be high quality. And there are distinct platforms which are coming together. They are all very good at what they do, but they need to interoperate with each other. To that extent, one of the things that we could do when Paytm was getting onboarded is provide our technology stack, where when an ONDC order is being generated, the browse, the search, that can be powered by Magicpin. And that made it a very seamless experience for someone who's not a food delivery specialist to become a food delivery specialist, right? Such that the user feels they are in a similar space versus when they are ordering on a specialized app. Customer service, how is it that we can handhold the customer across all of these platforms and still provide the same experience? The good news about all of these challenges is that they're solvable. Over a period, a lot of this infrastructure, to Sujith's point, will keep getting commoditized. There should not, and going back to the question you'd asked before this, the value should not be in the railroads that are getting built. The value should be in the product itself, which in this case is, let's say, the momos being built by Wow Momos, right? That's where the flavor should come in. Everything else should become more and more straightforward. And what that does, it then creates that field that someone can launch something on the buyer side with more innovation or the seller side. So I believe if we are able to continue to provide a high quality experience because the consumer would not dilute on that, then that is the most important piece that we take care of. And the inflection point in my mind is not years. I think it should happen a lot sooner. I'd say the next milestone should be, let's get to 100,000 orders, and not just one category, across categories. There's work being done all around. And as that happens, you would find the number of participants who are keen to come here. Right now, everyone was taken by surprise, including I'd say by myself that, oh, this can happen. But now that we know this can happen, there is just so much energy going into it that it should become a success and a lot sooner than what we might expect.
Okay. Sujith, let me get you to weigh in on that. One, of course, at this point in time, the expectation is that the discounts will be phased out come the 31st of May. At least that is the stated position at this point in time. We will have to wait to see if that is what transpires. But in terms of the user experience that Anshoo was talking about, removing any kind of pain points of friction on issues like interoperability, etc., again, something that we heard both from Anshoo as well as Sagar, it will require investments. It will require a further build-out as far as infrastructure is concerned. Where does the money come from? What should we expect in terms of the next milestones from here on?
Shereen, so when we talk about solving for experience, sort of getting, this whole delayed or deferred gratification that sometimes happen on an interoperable multi-platform transaction, I don't think the investment to solve for that is as high because I think the heavy lifting is not done by one company. You're essentially redistributing the risk and cost across multiple platforms. That's how you should look at it. It's a network where one person is solving for one thing, somebody else is solving for the other. And in this redistribution, what will also happen is that there will be new young tech startups, people who are good at algorithms to smoothen search, algorithms to have a fast integration with ONDC. There are a lot of young startups, which is like a bunch of few developers trying to build a nice little software as a service solution and offering that at a fairly low cost footprint and make available. I think the larger investment till date to solve for this problem has been on either on acquisition of the sellers, which itself is exorbitantly high today, or all that of merchants. But in terms of tech and plumbing of the tech, I think you do have smart solutions, cloud infrastructure is getting cheaper by the day and all that. So I don't think the investment will be so high, but also it gives you greater probability because you have a wider set of players solving the problem and not betting on one guy. So I think when you unbundle, you're not just unbundling the tech from a thing, you're unbundling the capabilities and not concentrating on one player to solve for customer acquisition and solving for the tech plumbing. Now that's getting redistributed. So it allows for more and more people coming up. And somewhere, I think that's exactly why UPI has become a lot more stable, seamless transaction. Although I agree, it's one commodity, one escape in some sense. But here, even in UPI with ONDC, the essential underlying characteristic of the tech is similar. Of course, with ONDC, there's an offline play in terms of delivery and all that. And I think Anshoo has alluded to some access to how can that be streamlined. But in terms of tech and cost itself, I don't think it's going to be much. And we are not standardizing everything into one sort of a commodity. Every SKU, every product is different. I mean, a Momo is very different from, let's say, how you want to order biryani and how you want to review a biryani product before you place an order. But the fact is it brings all of them together on a common rail. And that's important. Having a common rail reduces the cost of anything that you're trying to make available for purchase to a customer. And that's where you'll see a lot of tech innovations opening up, mushrooming up to solve for certain pieces of the puzzle, which are sort of like the seeming friction when you come to a multi-party transaction today.
A fair point that it's often not the tech plumbing, as you called it, that requires the deep pockets. But as we've seen, at least in the case of e-commerce specifically, it's the customer acquisition that's taken a bulk or a chunk of the dollars, and that's well put. But, to your point, and I found that phrase very interesting, there's a redistribution of risk and cost. So, Sagar, let me address this issue with you. What do you believe could possibly be the weak link in this redistribution of risk and cost? Because, as Sujith is pointing out, you need the ecosystem to come together and work together in a much more collaborative way to ensure that this does work. What do you see as the weak link?
See, the first biggest weak link that I see is that, if we continue doing the same practices that was done by the aggregators earlier, right, which is not considering, I personally feel, not considering restaurant as partners, but, considering them more like, I would say, a third-party service provider.
Sagar is not going to give up on the deep discount. Clearly, you've been scarred by the deep discounts.
Yeah, because the business model, Shereen, just does not make money. I mean, today you get your top lines, but you don't get money. Why do we do business for? We do business to get profits. And the entire focus on profitability is coming now when businesses are burning money and there's a funding winter. Why do we need to wait for a funding winter for that to happen? I think deep discounting e-commerce was brought in to scale the business, not to reduce the profit margins of the business, right? So I am completely for it. At the same time, also, Shereen, what I feel could also be a threat is, when you have multiple players and you have multiple operators, the experience bit of it, when it comes to learning and development of the rider to go and deliver a particular food in a particular manner and then doing it separately for a different commodity or service, can lead to various confusions being created, right? So today, with Swiggy, Zomato, to an extent, you're assured that that guy is delivering food and only food, right? With the ONDC network and with these third-party service providers, they would deliver food and they would deliver X, Y, Z, right? So I think the learning and development of these riders needs to be taken care of. And I think that has to be done by the ecosystem as a whole. It has to be owned by the restaurateur, at the same time by the service provider. I'll give you basics, In my stores, I started offering water to the riders when it's peak summer. Their attitude changed, So I think everyone has to play a role for the well-being of the rider, of the restaurateur, of the service provider, of the customer to make this a success.
No, I totally agree with you. And on that point, I saw a tweet being put out by Zomato about thanking customers. I think it's about 13.5 or more than that, 13,500 customers who had actually offered the rider a glass of water. And, I think we need to be mindful about how we treat the riders who are delivering this service to us as well. But Anshoo, coming back to you and the very same question, I think Sagar raised some valid points in terms of concerns. But what do you believe are the weak links that we need to be mindful of as we move towards scale and onboarding more players?
Yeah, no, just exactly as Sagar said it. I'll just answer a little bit more on the question you asked him also in terms of the cost and risk. The piece about this network is that each one of the participants anyway do what they are doing, and what the network is able to do, whether it's demand side app, a logistics provider, or let's say a seller app like us, it's good for us. And we're not doing anything new if we get more volumes on the business. Like the user acquisition problem you spoke of, for example, buyer apps, large buyer apps have users, they don't need to acquire them again. They just need to get trials done, and for which they might use incentives initially. So in a way, there are economies of scale here. The bigger the network, the more it's valuable to the participants. And that's where it becomes important for each of the participants to build trust and help each other out, such that the end consumer experience does not have issues. So I'll come back to that same point and say that how do we first start by making sure that we are not just doing our own bit, like Sagar said, right? Like, let's enable that rider. Let's understand how the assortment on the catalog is similar. Let's make sure that the ordering experience on the end buyer app is enabled in the same way as the users would like. So everyone, all the participants would have to kind of look towards each other and say, okay, I am responsible for even that piece, which I'm not doing. Let me extend support for that. Let me extend advice, right? And that way, ONDC is doing a good job of getting people together. And as that starts to happen, there is there is value for everyone for the network to become big. I think at scale, right? Some scale, I don't know, whatever that is, 100,000, 200,000, it becomes self-perpetuating. Getting it to that point is what will require this trust, collaboration, and people going out of their way to say that I will make sure that this network gets built.
Right. So, to be able to get to that inflection point that Anshoo and Sagar were talking about, what are the next steps, Sujith? I mean, PhonePe, for instance, has built PIN code. Axis Bank, we understand, is building a separate app for ONDC. What do you see as the next steps in being able to get to that inflection point? And straightforward question, Mr. Koshi, of course, has several times spoken about what he believes ONDC could potentially do and the kind of disruption that it can create in the marketplace. But do you really believe, and I'm quoting him, he believes that e-commerce as it is practiced today will become irrelevant. Do you really believe that to be the case?
I'm sure there is more context to what Koshi said, and probably Koshi can clarify that by himself. But I think the way I see it is fairly straightforward. I think there is a need for solving for some real systemic risk in the current model of e-commerce. The fact that it's not that e-commerce is been happening for just in the recent years. It's been there for well over a decade and a half in India, and yet we are looking at fairly lesser side of the population trying to use e-commerce, and especially in the urban areas and in a few select categories. My sense is, I think there are a whole lot of categories and sectors that needs to have the benefit of being participating in digital economy and participating in a digital commerce play. And second is to deepen the access and penetration. And we all went through the pandemic. It's kind of very odd that that in your neighborhood there are probably 5 to 20 kirana stores around you. They don't know what you're looking for, and you don't know whether they have what you're looking for. And there's just no way to figure out which platform or they are online for me to even place an order. So there is that sort of challenge that we need to deal with across the country, across categories. And I think I therefore believe that solving for reducing friction for that access and making every sort of a category, whether it's in retail or mobility or travel or tourism or agriculture or rural commerce, getting artisans to find a wider market beyond their immediate sort of local markets. I think these are all things that are necessary to be done. And ONDC as an infrastructure is essentially solving that and letting the market and the startups and the bright minds to come and build the innovation on top of it to solve for it by offering value, whether it's on the experience side or whether it's on trust, reliable delivery of goods, whether within the city or across the cities. All of that with market participation coming in, I think ONDC definitely is the answer. And to your previous point about what will bring scale and what will be the takeoff velocity that we are looking at on ONDC, I think my sense is you can see that numbers differently for different categories. For example, mobility, we are already seeing some instances of that taking off with Namayatri to some extent. And that's because it's a very high daily requirement, daily commute need, and everybody needs mobility, and places like that where we desperately need that. So I think the momentum would be different on different sectors. Kirana is a hard problem. So we have to admire the efforts of ONDC to take Kirana, which is one of probably the toughest categories to pick, and go with that, and restaurants for that matter. But you'll see contraction in different things, and we'll have to work on this constantly. I mean, we can all hazard a guess of what would be that number to take off, but I think there will be an ONDC kind of a play that will happen that will teach us what should be the numbers we should look for beyond a point. Over to you, Shereen.
Sujith, Sagar, and Anshoo, I would have liked to continue this conversation, but my producer's telling me we're already well over our time. But we'll bring the three of you back again, and hopefully, more who've been onboarded on ONDC to share their experiences and talk about this playbook that is in the process of its evolution. Sujith, Sagar, Anshoo, many thanks for joining us here on this special episode of Young Turks. We will take a break. There's a lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a minute with more.